Good morning, good day. Thank you for joining us for day number 4 of the Soil Summit. It is awesome to see so many beautiful, bright, shiny faces and souls gathered together in essence of regeneration, in essence of global regeneration for the soil, for the planet, and for all that is and all that is becoming. So we are deeply honored to share this space with you. And we are deeply grateful to just be a very small part of making this world a regenerative, beautiful place to live now and for years to come. And we are excited to have Gabe Brown in the room with us today. We're delighted that he was able to carve out some space to join us. Gabe Brown is, a lot of people in the room probably may have heard of Gabe. He's one of the more well-known regenerative farmers in the world based on a lot of the advocacy work that he's done and the recent documentary he was in, The Common Ground. And he is, feet on the ground, hands in the soil. He's also an author and really committed to helping people live their best life as a farmer, live into the regeneration of their land and their soil and their health. So with that, I welcome you, Gabe, to the Soil Summit 2024.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you today.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome to be here with you. So Gabe, and just to give people an idea of how this is going to go, Gabe and I are going to have a bit of a conversation, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So if you have questions you'd like to ask Gabe, they already know, then pop them into the chat and we will do our best to get through them all. And you can put question at the front of the question so we know it's a question, so it's easy for us to find. And then we'll ask them as they go through. And then if time permits, we will, if people want to come on and raise your hand, you can do that as well. So Gabe, just out of the gates, I'm curious, what is it about regeneration that's important to you today?
Well, today, I think what's important is it brings hope. It truly, in my mind, is the driving force for us as human beings to find common ground for common good. I spend much of my time today in front of this laptop talking to CEOs, heads of sustainability, farmers, ranchers. And the first thing I always start out with, I try and find out a little bit about them and what I like to call what's their pain point, where does their interest lie? Does their interest lie in the soil? Does it lie in clean air, clean water, quantity of water? Does it lie in climate change, carbon in the atmosphere, or does it lie in human health? Wherever their interest is, regenerative agriculture can play an important role in answering that interest. And so it's my belief that as human beings, we can agree on 85 to 90% of the issues. Why do we spend all our time focused on that 10%? Let's come together and find that common ground and truly move everyone forward.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We're more alike than we're unalike.
All right.
Yeah. And what does regeneration mean to you?
Yeah, regeneration to me is the opportunity for future generations to be sustainable. I despise the word sustainable. Why would we want to sustain a degraded resource?
Yeah.
I've had the good fortune, I've traveled extensively all over the world, been on thousands of farms, ranches, landscapes. I tell people I've never, ever been on a single one, including my own, that's not degraded. We're all farming and ranching and gardening degraded landscapes. Okay, we need to regenerate them so that future generations can make a living, eat nutrient dense food off that landscape, but also they then can have the opportunity to be sustainable. We don't have that luxury. That passed us by already.
Mhm. And Gabe, tell us about the moment you knew you had to do things differently. What was that like? What did that
Yeah, well, I tell people the good Lord blessed me with 3 years of hail and a year of drought. And when you lose 4 crops in a row, it's not like it was all of a sudden I had this light bulb moment. It's like over 4 years of not being able to pay back my operating notes and the lender not wanting to loan me money in order to buy inputs. It was slowly over time, it came to me, hey, this isn't working. I have to find something else. But the beauty of it is, I tell people, those 4 years were extremely difficult to live through, but they were the best thing that could have happened to my family and I, because I was being shown the principles of soil health that drive the ecosystem processes through those years of disasters. You know, hailstorms lay a lot of carbon down on the soil surface. That's armoring the soil. I was already not tilling, so I wasn't disturbing that soil. I couldn't afford to buy the fertilizer chemical inputs, so that goes into the principle of least amount of disturbance. I was starting to expand my crop rotation just to try and diversify to be profitable. So that's adding diversity to the system. I saw life returning to our ranch, you know, wildlife, birds, insects, you know, earthworms. So that was biodiversity. I was integrating more livestock and more species of livestock. So I was learning these things due to those 4 years of hardships.
Mhm.
Um, Again, I'd go, you know, if I had to, I'd go through them all over again, although I certainly wouldn't wish that on anyone else. But it was a real learning opportunity. And that's what I tell people. To me, regeneration is all about learning and how do you adapt and move forward. And it's one of, I had to learn to not try and impose my will on nature. How do I work with nature instead of against her?
Hmm. And what have you learned about that? Tell us more about working with nature instead of against it.
Well, one of the things that I just in a long discussion with a group yesterday about this is how in agriculture, so often the farmer, the rancher is trying to impose their will. Like here I am in central North Dakota. We're in a cool season environment. You know, we only have about 110 or 20 frost-free days a year. Okay. Yet you look at the agriculture around this area, it's become corn and soybeans. Well, corn and soybeans are warm season crops. Okay. Now, it's okay to grow a little, but not 100% of your crop rotation in them. You have to farm or ranch in your context. And I'll use myself as an example. For way too long, I calved in February and March in North Dakota. Well, there's no deer in North Dakota that are having their fawns in the middle of a blizzard. No, they have their fawns in late May and June. Well, I learned, okay, I'm out of context with nature. Now we calve in late May and June, no issues. You know, we have to work within the context of our environment. And I look at what's happening over large areas where we're overusing water, we're emptying the aquifers, and, you know, we shouldn't be farming in the middle of a desert. You know, that's just ecologically does not make any sense, or economically for that matter. We have to get back to farming and ranching in context with our environment. Another thing in agriculture to get to drive that fact home is the fact that so often today we're trying to outproduce our environment. There's a lot of contests out there who can grow the greatest yield. Well, what nobody talks about is that comes at a cost because you add more and more synthetic inputs to drive up yield. That actually degrades the health of the soil. And we all know it has to do with carbon nitrogen ratios, feed and biology. So I learned a long time ago that we need to learn to accept what nature has to offer us this year. There has to be an equilibrium where we're cycling enough energy and carbon, putting it in the soil, where when we remove, for instance, a cash crop, we're not degrading that soil. We've totally lost that in production agriculture as a whole. We need to get back to those principles.
Hmm. And where would you suggest, knowing what you know now and having witnessed your own and experienced your own personal transformation on your farm, and then witnessing, hundreds of other farms making their transition, knowing what you know now, what would you suggest to a farmer who's wanting to transition away from using chemicals to farming regeneratively? What would be the first steps?
Yeah. And it's not only just about chemicals, that is an important part of it. But the first step is farmers and ranchers cannot implement what they do not know. I have 2 college degrees. Never in any of my soils classes did they talk to me about the energy cycle, the water cycle, the nutrient cycle. Never did they talk to me about how a soil aggregate is formed. I bet you if I go poll 100 farmers, I'm lucky if 3 of them could answer how an aggregate is formed, yet that aggregate, their whole livelihood depends on building those aggregates and the result of building aggregates. You need to educate yourself first. The principles, the rules, the processes, those are universal all over the world. That's why I'm so confident that, you could put me anywhere in the world where there's land-based agriculture and I could regenerate those soils, and because it's simply following the principles of nature. But as a farmer or rancher wanting to move down this path, or a gardener, homeowner, whatever the case may be, you have to be educated first. That's why, this conference you've been putting on is so important. It's all about education.
Thanks for that. There's a question. Tell us what a soil aggregate is.
Yeah. So oftentimes I'll go to a client's farm or ranch and they'll say, "Oh, Gabe, you don't understand. My soil isn't like that. It's too much sand, too much clay." A soil aggregate is simply sand, silt, and clay particles held together by biotic glues. That's what it is. So we can build aggregates anywhere. I can go onto a beach and build soil aggregates. I can go into tight clay soils and build soil aggregates. How you approach it's going to be just a little bit different, but the principles are the same. And it's that aggregate that's so important. I always tell people, think of an aggregate like a marble in a jar. You have to have those aggregates in order for water to infiltrate. And then the majority of biology lives in and on thin films of water in the pore spaces between those aggregates. If you don't have aggregates, you don't have water. If you don't have water, you don't have biology. If you don't have biology, you don't have nutrient cycling. You don't have nutrient cycling, you don't have production. You don't have production, you don't have nutrient dense food. This really isn't rocket science. It's not that difficult to figure out. We just have to understand.
Yeah, that's powerful. We just have to understand.
Mhm.
So if you had 10 minutes to spend with a farmer who had no idea of what you just said or what you just talked about, and the words are, it's like speaking a different language, how would you summarize what they need to know and what they need to learn?
Yep, very easily, because I've done this hundreds of times. I take a spade we walk out into their field, dig a spade full of soil. Then I walk over to the fence line, the road ditch, an undisturbed area, dig a spade full of that soil and show them the difference. And that will open their eyes. Then I drive a infiltration ring in and pour some water in. We watch the infiltration rate on their field, watch it on that fence line, that undisturbed area. If that doesn't grab their attention, then they're not ready to learn.
And then what do you want them to learn from there?
What I want them to learn is, okay, there is a difference, and they can't give me the excuse, I don't understand their soils and that, because it's the same soil, just a few feet away. The difference is management, or as I prefer to call it, stewardship. It's our stewardship of that land that dictates how healthy that soil ecosystem is. So right there, it shows them, hey, there's a difference.
Mhm, mhm. And where do you point people towards for education and
Hmm.
learning?
Yeah, there's many places to go. When I started down this path, I tell people I had to go to the library and use the Dewey Decimal System to look up
Right?
books and materials. Now all you gotta do is Google soil health and a whole myriad of opportunities. You need to seek out like-minded individuals and seek out those who are truly making a living from the land doing this. Uh, we have a nonprofit called Soil Health Academy that offers both online courses and in-person 3-day intensive workshops. As I said, conferences such as you're doing here, this virtual conference is fantastic. Anybody can listen in and learn. And that's where it starts. That's where it starts. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And there's practitioners in every country all over the world. I was on a podcast here 2 days ago, so I kept track the 24-hour period up to that podcast. I had people reach out to me from 11 different countries around the world. That's just in 24 hours.
Wow.
I will average 200 to 400 emails and phone calls every day. And it's from people all over the world wanting to move down the regenerative path. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
We can share with each other and learn. One of the things that excites me the most about regenerative agriculture is the opportunity to learn. And I tell people, Gabe Brown really isn't very smart. I've just met a lot of very smart people, and I'm able to glean from them. And that's what's important. You have to glean from all these different sources and then put it in your context on your farm or ranch
Mhm.
or in your garden. But I'll guarantee you one thing, it will work, you know. And I've made this challenge before. Anybody out there who doesn't think it'll work on their farm or ranch, I will bet you my ranch against yours that I can get it to work. But I'll tell you, you're going to lose. There's
Yeah.
zero doubt of that. You will lose because I will get it to work.
Oh, that gives me goosebumps. It actually puts tears in my eyes, Gabe. I remember when I grew up in an organic farm, so um the soil I would say was always pretty darn good. I grew up with worms in my hands and underneath anything we left lying around the farm, whether it was clothes or boxes or whatever it was. And in 1989, my parents bought a farm in Chilliwack, BC. And I remember going out to that farm, and I was the oldest of 12 kids, still am. And there was a little creek kind of that ran along the or ditch that ran along the farm, and I wanted to do fishing with them. And so we scoured the entire 110 acres for worms, and we could not find one worm. And had been a dairy farm, and they had farmed it with chemicals and all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And I remember picking up handfuls of this earth in my hands and looking at it and wondering if that is what the surface of the moon was like. It was just so dry and lifeless.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most transformative experiences was seeing that soil come back to life or
Yep.
come to life. It changed my whole experience of the world, because up until then I was just kind of told organic farming was good and our food was healthy or whatever the things, and to actually see soil come to life was
Mm-hmm.
that was life changing.
You were changing dirt to soil is what you were doing.
That's right.
And I just want to be clear. I've been on very good organic farms, but
Mhm.
I've been on very degraded organic farms also.
Yeah.
So I don't want us to think that just going organic is the answer. It's an important part to eliminate the synthetics, but that's but a small piece of the puzzle. We
I
have to think way beyond that.
yeah,
We and really truly regenerate the ecosystem.
yeah, I agree 100%. Gabe, what do you wish people asked you more about that you don't get asked about very often in this space?
I really think there's a big misunderstanding as to nutrient density of foods and nutrients in food. People are used to reading a label, and it says protein, carbohydrates, fats, but it doesn't tell you anything about phytonutrient compounds and what truly drives our gut microbiome. And they don't understand that the diversity of the biology in the soil and the health of that soil then directly correlates to those phytochemical compounds in their foods, which drive our gut microbiome. And I think that's the next tier of, of knowledge that we're just beginning. There's a scientists now like Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, Dr. Fred Provenza, that are learning about this and starting to bring it to the forefront. And to me, that's really exciting, because I think if we're going to heal as a society, we really need to get back to where our food is medicine, and we're truly purchasing food as preventative medicine.
Mm. And tell me more about what you're learning about that.
Well, we're involved, we being Understanding Ag, our consultant company, are involved with research where we identify farms and ranches that are using these regenerative practices. And then we find neighboring farms and ranches that are quote unquote conventional practices or organic practices. And then the scientific team is coming on and they're doing very, very in-depth analysis of soils and water and inputs that are being used. Then we're growing the same fruit, vegetable, or crop, or the same pastured protein on both the farms, and then we're analyzing them. Dr. Van Vliet uses a mass spectrometer. He can analyze approximately 1,500 different phytochemical compounds. And what he's finding out, that the difference isn't just a little bit, it's absolutely amazing, the difference. Soil health can truly equate to nutrient dense food.
I agree with that 100%. It's fascinating. And how do you think we create the shift in change and towards more regenerative practices in farming?
Yeah, and great question. And I think it's a combination. We have to continue to educate farmers, ranchers, gardeners. But to me, the shift is going to come the fastest if we educate the consumer. Consumers vote every day with their buying dollar. And if we can truly show them that there is a difference in the quality of the food that they're buying, it's not going to take a major amount. If we get to 15 to 20% of the consumers voting with their buying dollar, that's going to pull farmers' supply chains, farmers and ranchers along. Because when consumers demand it, companies, because they're interested in their bottom line, they're going to see that demand. As I said, I'm spending a lot of time now talking to CEOs, boards of directors, heads of sustainability of these large companies who are going, hey, what's this about, Gabe? Tell us more. And so it's educating them. And then as they shift their supply chain, that is going to change the practices of farmers and ranchers.
So be it. And is there a limit to the size of farm that can switch to regenerative practices?
Well, as clients, Understanding Ag, we have over 34 million acres now we're actually consulting on across North America. Our smallest client is 1/4 of an acre. Our largest client is over 2 million acres. So the answer is no. It's anywhere.
Yeah.
It's anywhere, any size.
Yeah, so true. And what about the practices that are used? Do people need to change equipment, or what's a startup cost to making these changes in your experience?
Yeah, great question. And that's always one that we get asked. And that's why we added the 6th principle of context. And I give Ray Archuleta, who was a business partner of mine, that the credit for that. He said we have to work within the context not only of the environment, but each individual has a different financial context, different family context, different spiritual context. We have to work within that. So what we've found is you go and start where they're at, and you don't make drastic changes, and realize every person has a different aversion to risk. I've worked with clients who we always ask, okay, you got to dedicate a field or a pasture for 5 years. Well, some dedicate 5 acres over the hill where no neighbor will see it. I had one client, first year, 8,000 acres of cover crops. Didn't care, it just made sense to him. He went all in and he could financially afford that. So you have to work within their context. And oftentimes there's no need for a change in equipment unless you're plowing every year. We're gonna start changing that and minimize the disturbance. We work with a lot of organic producers. We know tillage is going to be often a part of their practices. But in saying that, can we reduce the frequency of that tillage? And that's where we start. You start where their comfort level is. You start showing them the differences where the majority of time we're quickly able to increase profitability. Once they see increased profit, then they're going to be more bought in, and they'll be willing to put a larger percentage of their move a larger percentage of their land base to regenerative practices.
Mhm. And Gabe, what would you say are the top three practices or strategies in the regenerative space that make the biggest amount of difference, that move the needle the most in moving a farm towards or soil towards regeneration?
Yeah, and um, it all starts with the 6 principles that drive the 4 ecosystem processes. But of those, disturbance, we can't, whether it be through tillage or through copious amounts of chemical inputs, we have to cut back on those. Armor on the soil is key. And I tell people this, whether they're gardeners, whether they're ranchers, whether they're farmers, if you see bare soil, you're losing the battle. Our goal on our ranch is we should never see bare soil anywhere, because you're prone to wind erosion, water erosion, evaporation. You're having a negative impact on biology and the nutrient cycle. And that's negative to the energy cycle. If you see bare soil, you're not capturing solar energy. So disturbance, armor, and then the third one I would say is biodiversity. We have to have a wide array of different plant, animal, and insect species on our operations. Those are 3 of the keys for me.
And how do you encourage biodiversity?
Yeah. I mentioned when I went through those years of hail and drought, I just started planting a wider array of cash crops simply because I wanted to stretch out and have different revenue streams. What I really came to understand is it was allowing me to capture more sunlight, more of that solar energy. So often in large scale production agriculture, especially in the US, it's driven by revenue insurance from farm program payments. And so people are only planting, a couple of different cash crops on their farms. That's just a slow death. You're degrading the soil, you're not moving ahead. You need to increase biodiversity, not to mention what it's doing negatively, the negative compounding effects it has on the soil life biodiversity. The more biodiverse our soil microorganisms, the more we're going to cycle those nutrients, and then the healthier the product, whatever we're producing, becomes.
I know the bionutrient meter was being used to check out the nutrient density of food. Is there anything else that you know of that people can use or tap into to?
Well, and that gets back to the work that Dr. Van Vliet is doing. And I know the company Regenified, which is a regenerative certification company, has an agreement with Dr. Van Vliet, and they're able to do nutrient testing of grains, fruits, vegetables, pastured proteins. If you get into that level, though, of testing where you're testing for for all these phytochemicals, it's very expensive.
Yeah.
Okay, the average consumer is not going to use that. Now, I'll put it this way, and I'm very familiar with the work Dan Kittredge and the Bionutrient Food Association is doing. That's a step in the right direction. Dr. Van Vliet's work is multiple steps more in depth than that.
Complex, yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. Gabe, can you give us some examples of the productivity and the financial risk or reward associated with transitioning to regenerative practices?
Sure, and let me use one of my clients who lives just 100 miles north of me here in North Dakota. He first reached out to me in winter of 2018, 2019. He was doing some no-till practices, not completely no-till. It was a strict grain farming operation, some diversity, not that much. Attended one of our soil health academies, bought into it, started using the Johnson Sioux method to make compost tea, which he used as a seed inoculum, started to diversify his crop rotation, started backing off on synthetics. And what he found, okay, he's been at it 4 years now. He's been farming regeneratively. He's reduced his synthetic fertility from 40 to 60%, depending on the crop. He's reduced his pesticides 100%. He's totally eliminated them, totally eliminated his fungicides, and he's reduced his herbicides on average 50%. His last 2 years were the most profitable 2 years he's ever had. And here's a young family, the husband's about 40 years of age approximately, and he's retiring debt. I mean, it's unbelievable what he's been able to do with the savings. And I think that's the thing. It's, there's very few people who will just jump in 100%. Okay. You have to slowly, and I tell people, if you've been using all these synthetic inputs, the soil's like a drug addict. You're not just going to quit cold turkey. You've got to build the populations of the soil biology and that, and you've got to build aggregations and get that soil functioning first. But I hear and see story after story on how profitable it becomes. But even more so than that, we all want profitability. We need to make a living. But what else it does for human health from the standpoint, not only nutrient dense food, but mental health. Like
Mm,
talking to this young family, their children now are of the age, they're teenagers, they're going to want to come back to the farm.
mhm,
And they enjoy it again. And that's one thing I hear over and over again is, Gabe, this makes farming fun again,
mm,
instead of stressful. I mean, if you're able to retire debt and, able to farm without the bank, that's a good thing. It makes farming and ranching fun again.
mhm. And what has that mental, emotional, spiritual context meant for you?
Yeah, well, anyone who knows me knows that my faith is a big part of what I do, and I'm not afraid to say that. And it's faith that got me, my wife and I, through those 4 years. And I really think that any of us involved in agriculture, put our hands in the soil, know that we're part of something much greater than ourselves. And that's a good thing. The indigenous peoples, last night I was doing a Q&A with a Native American tribe, and they were talking about the 7 generations. They believe that what they do affects 7 generations into the future. I just really can resonate with that because I believe what I'm doing on my farm and ranch will affect many generations to come.
Mhm. Yeah, so true. There's a question here. What regenerative practices would you recommend on converting a golf course for farming?
And that's now, are they say converting a golf course to farming or
Yeah,
just a
for
golf?
farming, for farming. Yeah, converting a golf course for farming. So changing a golf course over to farming is how I read that.
Wow, that's interesting. I can't say I've ever had that question before. Converting it to farming. Um, and the best way, obviously, with the golf course, you're going to have roughs and, you know, fairways, etc., that are perennial forages. The best way to do it is with grazing animals. You
Mm.
know, grazing animals are key to healing any perennial ecosystem. So even though that fairway and that is a monoculture now, using adaptive grazing practices where you're using higher stock densities followed by long periods of rest and recovery, that'll heal and you'll see an increase in biodiversity rather quickly.
Mm. What surprised you the most about what you've learned about regenerative agriculture and farming?
Surprised me the most. It surprised me just how much influence our practices, or as I said, our stewardship can have over the land and how much change. I've seen tight yellow clay soils converted to 18 inches of beautiful black topsoil. You know,
Mm.
I've seen white beach sand converted to black topsoil. It's still sandy, but there's aggregates there, there's earthworms there. It absolutely amazes me how nature is always self-organizing, self-regulating, self-healing, if we allow her to be.
And what's the biggest mistake people make?
Removing too much, trying
Mm.
to outproduce their environment, farming out of context with their environment. That's the biggest mistake. I was explaining this last night on the call that we work with a lot of ranchers all over North America. 95% of ranchers are overstocked. They're running too many animals for their environment. And what that causes is that causes lower diversity. It makes the root system shallower, aggregation shallower. So it has these compounding negative effects, which negatively affect their profitability. And I had a gentleman call yesterday. Here I am in North Dakota, and on our ranch, you know, we get some winters, so we typically feed a little hay, but it's usually for only 30 to 45 days during the winter. Well, this particular producer was from Georgia, and they were feeding hay 6 months out of the year. And that just doesn't make sense to me. You're in Georgia, you shouldn't be feeding hay at all, you know, except for an ice storm or something. And so people are overstocked and they're trying to outproduce their environment. And that's just never a good thing.
Mm. And when you say they try to, I'll use the word remove things too quickly, like, can you give us some more examples of that?
Well, they're removing too much carbon, like you see so often. Okay, we're gonna go out and we're gonna hay this field. We're gonna put up hay on it. So
Mhm.
you're removing all the above ground biomass. Well, then you get a little bit of regrowth in the fall. Oh, that's greening up. Let's go and graze it. Well, how did that plant ever have a chance to put carbon back into the soil? Or you take a crop farmer who we're going to go out and we're going to combine off the cash crop, then we're going to bale off the straw, and then let's disc the remaining stubble under, okay, which will only accelerate decomposition. You're losing there. That's just a negative, negative, negative. You can't keep doing that year after year and expect to heal the ecosystem. I often use as an example, the ranch I'm on was purchased by my in-laws in 1956. And they tilled the soil, half summer fallow, half crop. And it was just a slow degradation of the soil. So when my wife and I purchased the farm from them in 1991, we were down to 1.7 to 1.9% organic matter. Well, historically speaking, we should have been in the 7 to 8% range. So 75% of the carbon that was once in the soil has gone up into the atmosphere, you know, and that's why I just, all these carbon schemes about how do we get carbon out of the atmosphere, it's not that difficult. Let's grow some plants and manage them correctly, preferably with grazing animals. and we'll take that carbon out of the atmosphere very quickly.
Hmm. And so if a person doesn't have animals as a part of the operation, is that something you support them to do?
It depends on their context.
Mm.
Realize there's certain situations where animals just aren't going to fit into a person's context. But here's what I tell people. You can regenerate your cropland soils with diversity of cash crops, diversity of cover crops, but they will never be as healthy as they could be if you would integrate grazing animals onto them also. It'll just help take it to another level.
Mhm. So you're talking about actually having grazing animals go all over the farmland, not just in a special area where you're gathering the manure and changing it into compost. You're talking grazing animals over the whole.
There, yeah, you really need to integrate. And I tell the story how 1998, we got hailed out in late June. It was too late to seed a cash crop and get it to maturity. So I seeded sorghum, sudan grass, millet, and some peas. And then I literally did not have the money to be able to cut that and bale that up as forage. So I turned the cattle in there in the winter, put up a polywire electric fence, moved them daily. And one, I needed to make as much use out of that as I could. But what happens, it's snowing often and they're grazing part, trampling part. The next spring, that soil was unbelievable what that did. Because I was putting armor on, we had dung on it, we had urine on it. That was the start of it. And I'm going, Gabe, why in the world do you want to put those animals in a corral? If you think your animals should be in a corral, go open the gate once and see where they want to go. I'll guarantee you they're not going to stay there, right? They want to be out grazing.
That's so cool. So what did you notice? What were the changes in your soil that you noticed?
Yeah, you just noticed much darker color. You noticed more carbon. You noticed, now this is over time, but you could just smell the difference, the earthworms, the life, because when we graze these cover crops, we take approximately half or less of the above ground biomass, and the rest is our armor. That's protecting the soil. That's keeping that soil from being exposed. That also is providing food for the macrobiology. Earthworms are pulling that residue down into the soil. And you mentioned it earlier, how if you'd lay a piece of cardboard or some clothing on the soil, it'd be earthworms underneath it. Well, it's the same way. You're stimulating that biology.
Mhm.
So very, very apparent very quickly.
Mhm. Gabe, how long can it take to regenerate a piece of land where the topsoil, about 8 inches or so, has been removed to sell to companies and the land has been left bare?
Yeah, and there's a lot of factors that'll come into play there. Moisture, growing season, diversity. The
Mhm.
quickest that I've seen it done is using what we call bale grazing, where you're actually bringing some carbon source on to cover that soil. And then, you don't allow the animals to eat all that hay. They eat some, they trample some, then they defecate, urinate on it, and that really jumpstarts it. I've got some very interesting pictures, just fascinating, from mine reclamation in Mexico where they're using that tactic. It's amazing how quickly they can regenerate those soils.
Mhm. Worms love that environment.
Yeah.
They come and eat it up so fast. They turn it into gold for you. That's a good answer. What have been some of the most biggest challenges that you've seen people come up against, and how have they got through them?
Boy, that's a good question. I mean, anytime you work with nature, there's challenges. And everything from weather challenges, flooding, drought, etc. Probably some of the most difficult to help people deal with is financial challenges, and oftentimes they'll call me if they're in dire straits, and I tell them sometimes you need to amputate a limb to save the body. Sometimes you got to sell land. Sometimes you have to sell equipment and livestock. And, those challenges are difficult. The challenges, though, of regenerating the soil, the biggest challenges is when we come into toxicity problems, where it's been exposed to so much chemical or effluent from, whether it be plants, industrial plants, etc. Those can be a challenge to remediate.
Mhm. And you touched on something really vulnerable, which is the financial burden of making really hard decisions
Mhm.
to move forward in the direction that we are being pulled to move forward in. And so can you just talk a little bit more, tell us a little bit more about that and how to navigate those decisions that we have to make sometimes?
Yeah, and I tell people it's widely known when my wife and I went through those 4 years of hail and drought, at the end of them, we were $1.5 million in debt, which in 1998 was a lot of money for a young couple. And how do you get out of that debt? Well, first thing is you don't spend money. So what we started doing was, we can all project on a farm and ranch our cash flow. And what we did is we paid ourselves first. Okay, we knew how much money we needed to feed our young family and pay for health insurance, etc. Then what absolutely has to be paid? Well, land taxes, because we don't want them to take the land. Okay, then we're going to make our land payment, and you start going down the list, and pretty soon you only have a small amount left, if any. Okay, that's the amount you got for inputs, whether it's fertilizer, chemical, whether it's salt for the cattle, whatever. That's all we had, and you live within your means. But the important thing I said there is we paid ourselves first, because nothing will put more stress on a family than if you don't put food on the table, than if you don't pay the household bills first. Okay. I tell a story. My wife and I went over 20 years without going to a movie together. We just didn't go out to eat. Well, first of all, I don't like restaurant food, plain and simple, but her cooking's much better. But you just don't spend money. And what I found was, okay, that was 1998.
Mhm.
2007, we only had to borrow a little bit of money for operating. We already had that paid off. Okay. But all my equipment was 20 to 30 years old. There was nothing new. We just didn't do that. And what you find out is you really don't need as much as you think you do, you know? So, which is a good thing.
Yeah, so true. There was a question in here, Gabe, about turning sand into soil. My words, not theirs. How would you regenerate sandy soil, poor in organic matter in a Mediterranean climate where the summers are quite hot in the summer without a drop of moisture in 3 months?
Yep. And how we did it is you have to armor the soil. And we actually went in there and used bales and feeding animals on those sandy soils and putting carbon on there. Then you let grow whatever grows. And people say, oh, I can't let that grow. That's a weed. No, that's not a weed. It's a forb. The minute we start thinking of something as a weed, we've lost the battle. All plants have a purpose. Okay. We need to understand that any plant is going to cycle solar energy and through photosynthesis move those carbon compounds down into the soil. That's the start. That's what you do. And then you allow those species to grow whatever comes. And then you graze them appropriately with livestock, whatever species that may be, adding more dung and urine. And you can turn sand into soil. It's still going to be sandy soils, but it'll be aggregated soil.
Yeah, that's so
Mhm.
cool. It's like magic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, Gabe, what does biodiversity mean to you?
Uh, I think all biodiversity starts with life in the soil. And, I know you had Dr. Lane Ingham on, one of my mentors. There's more life in a teaspoon full of healthy soil, and there are people on this planet, you know, and that's hard for people to believe. But it's true, all life starts in the soil. And if you have biodiversity in the soil, below ground, then you need biodiversity of plant species, animals, insects above ground. I remember another one of my mentors, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, in 2011. I heard him for the first time. And he told us for every insect species that's a pest, there's 1,700 that are beneficial or indifferent. Why, as a farmer or rancher, do we want to kill that one pest? Why not just promote the beneficials? And nature will always, again, self-healing, self-organizing, self-regulating. So I knew right then and there, well, that's foolish. I got to drop the insecticides and everything. And we did, you know, and amazing. Everything comes into balance. You know, I'm not saying there's not ebbs and flows of them, but I can honestly say I have not had to spend 1 minute at a time thinking about pests on our ranch. It'll come into balance. Don't worry about
It's so powerful. And I love what you said there. And I love hearing when people, hearing people say that. So I'm going to repeat it. Self-healing, self-organizing, and self-regulating. And I just want to invite every single person to deepen into that and feel into that, both for themselves and their own personal health and wellness and vitality, and for the soil that you're stewarding and for the earth. It's
it.
very powerful. Gabe, where are you at today, and what is your driving mission? Like what's
Yeah. I keep saying one of these years I'll get a life, you know, but every day I'm blessed. I get phone calls, emails of people thanking me for what I've done and sharing my story, our family story. And that's what motivates and drives me. I'm in no way motivated by money. What I'm motivated now is the human health crisis that we're seeing all over the world. And I know a big part of that is that by and large, the majority of people do not have access to nutrient-dense food. In fact, I contend 90% of the people have never tasted nutrient-dense food. You know, they haven't. Today we produce food-like substances. We don't produce food. And we have to get back to a place where the land is capable of producing these foods that are high in these phytochemical compounds. You know, when we see 50% of young people being diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, Crohn's disease, Parkinson's, Alzheimer, cancer, the rates of them skyrocketing, we can't stick our head in the sand and think that what we're doing, where is it coming from? What's causing it? We have to, you know, understand and learn. And I firmly believe it starts with the soil and it starts with the food we're producing.
Mm. So true. So true. And I just want to add to, I remember being in elementary school and being so mad because all the other kids got Kool-Aid, and it looked good. It was really pretty colors, and we never had anything cool like that. So I just begged and begged and begged and begged for Kool-Aid. There was no way it was happening in our house. And I don't know who brought it in. It was probably my aunt or grandma who snuck it into to my life. And I remember like just salivating and just ready for that first taste of Kool-Aid. And I remember the moment that it hit my lips and my palate, and I was just like, that's it. Because it was
Yeah.
so unsatiating and it was so disappointing because I was used to, homemade apple juice. It was like fresh pressed, between like big blocks of wood. And so I was used to this nutrient dense, like party my mouth food. And then to experience Kool-Aid was very underwhelming. And I remember even at a really young age, just having this massive, like mind-blowing experience of the paradigm that most of my friends were living in, thinking that their food was really good, and how that was even possible, that that was the narrative that they were being told.
Mhm. My favorite scene in the documentary Common Ground is when Roy Thompson's little boy is grabbing those handfuls of spinach out of the garden and just
Yeah.
shoveling them in his mouth. You know that was nutrient dense food when you have a 4-year-old grabbing spinach like that, you know, and eating it. And that's the thing. Our bodies know when it's nutrient dense. You know, right now, most children growing up today, it's sugar and salt and artificial flavorings that's driving their food choices. It's not the nutrients.
Mm. So I just really want a presence in the room here for everybody, and to people who are watching this, that you are leaders in this space, and you are the people who are creating change and growing this incredible, delicious, nutrient-dense food for people. And even if you are here and you haven't started that transition yet, you already have, because you're here. Your consciousness is already opened up to that possibility, and you're stepping into the next steps, and you're absorbing and learning. And we just really want to hold this space for you in that, and stand in that essence, and stand in those conversations, and stand in the opportunity to deepen into the how purposeful your work is, because it really is purposeful. And I really, really want to amplify the leaders and the light workers that you are on this planet, because I don't think you get thanked enough, and I don't think you understand how important the work is that you are doing. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and to on those hard days when it feels like everything's falling apart, to know that it's worth it, and just to keep on keeping on, and to surround yourself in good communities like this, and with other friends and family and farmers who are doing similar things to you, so that you have a support network to keep working through things, and to keep learning together, especially in the early days, especially in those transition days when you're still kind of figuring it out, or maybe if your profitability is off, just to surround yourself in those support networks.
Yeah, very, very well said. And I would just add to that, that every single person out there can make a difference, and a
Mhm.
significant difference. You know, make a difference, start with yourself and your family, and then move forward into the school systems, into the local community. But everybody can make a difference. I talk negatively about the current food system, but we have to realize it was consumer demand that led us to this current food system. Consumer demand can lead us to a much better system, one that's regenerative.
Mhm. Mhm. I agree. There's a couple of good questions here. Lucas says that he said, I'm really scared to and frightened to go no-till as an organic farmer. Do you have any pointers on how to start that?
Yeah, and here's what I would tell them, then don't. Okay, we're not going to tell you to go 100% no-till. That'll be a progression over time. In our company, we work with a lot of organic producers, some of the largest organic producers in the US. And what we do is we transition them slowly over time. We wouldn't eliminate tillage totally right away. Let's do it slowly over time. Can we eliminate a pass here or there? Can we diversify the crop rotation? So once you harvest a cash crop, we can immediately go to a fall seeded biennial, for instance, something so you eliminate that fall tillage pass. Reach out to me. I'd be happy to walk you through a little bit, give you some ideas.
That's awesome. Thank you, Gabe. Our farm is my parents' farm, that my brothers farm full time. They've gone really, they farm organically. They still do some tilling, but it's really low till compared to
There you
where,
go.
yeah. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that really has impacted it. And I don't know that they ever will go no till, because they're doing things like carrots and beets
Mhm.
and things like that. So
Mhm.
I appreciate the spectrum of, it's not necessarily no-till. It's where you're at, and what can you do differently to do maybe less till or
Context,
reduce.
context. We
Yeah.
have to
So
work within our context.
yeah, so just really honor where you're at and notice where you want to be and what your next step is. So it's not jumping off the Eiffel Tower or
Yeah.
getting to the top of Mount Everest right away or having the perfect dream farm next season. It's what is your next step and
Mhm.
stepping into that. Um, I'm just going through questions here to see if there's anything. If you have more questions for Gabe, pop them into the chat. I'll ask you next then, Gabe, what does cultivating life mean to you?
Cultivating life to me is, and I always tell people this, you know, when I was in a conventional mindset, I woke up every morning trying to decide what I was going to kill that day. Was it going to be a weed, a pest, you know, a fungal disease? I was going to kill something. I realized as I went down the regenerative path that it's all about life and how do I promote more life? And that life is not only on my individual farm or ranch, it means life of family, community, and a much greater good. And that's why I love the saying common ground for common good. You know, let's focus on the positives. You know, let's come together. We can always find common ground on some things. We can start somewhere. And what I found is you get people in a room, get them talking, people are much more similar than dissimilar. So when I talk about cultivating life, it's all life, from the smallest microorganism up to humans, elephants, beyond.
Mhm. And Gabe, tell us more about how we can make an impact and difference in context of talking about the food that we grow or the food or the way that food is grown. What are some of the conversation starters or questions that we can presence?
Yeah, and the first thing is consumers need to familiarize themselves in truly how nutrient dense food is grown and raised, and really as best they can get to know their farmer or rancher. Go to a farmer's market, source as much as you can locally, support the local community, okay? But get to know that farmer or rancher. I always tell people on our ranch we have an open door policy. Anybody can drive on our ranch and anytime and look at everything outside of the house. My wife draws the line there, but you know, you don't be afraid to show them. I would rather them come and ask questions and we explain why we do what we do and how we do it. Then they become informed. And once they're informed, they start, you know, and they can taste the difference, they can see the difference. You know, it's not difficult to drive on my ranch and a neighboring ranch and see the difference. You're gonna see life. You're gonna see the animals, you know, are comfortable and living a good life, and so they'll see the soil. Well, then they start tasting the difference. They start telling their friends about it. That just steamrolls, and pretty soon you have built a community. And you're being an educator, and all of us need to be educators.
Mhm.
We need to become lifelong learners and educators.
Mhm. So be it and so it is. I love that. Gabe, tell us a little bit more about your courses that you offer.
So, Understanding Ag is our consulting company. We consult on farms and ranches and for businesses. And then we have a nonprofit called Soil Health Academy. And Soil Health Academy's mission is that of education. When Ray Archuleta, David Brandt, and Dr. Alan Williams, when the four of us founded Understanding Ag, we knew that the missing link, why more farmers and ranchers weren't doing this, is, and gardeners, I'll add that, is that they can't implement what they do not know, as I said earlier. So it's about education. So Soil Health Academy has online courses available. It also offers 3-day, very intense instructional courses on regenerative farms and ranches all over North America. And you can go on their website to find those out. We also, on our Understanding Ag website, we have free webinars. We do webinars every month, and We archive them. There's no cost on a wide array of different topics because it's all about education. And then a third company that we recently formed is named Regenified, and Regenified's mission is, we see a lot of greenwashing. There's companies out there saying they're sourcing regeneratively grown and raised products, and we're going, boy, just because it's no-till doesn't mean necessarily it's regenerative. So Regenified's goal and mission is, how do we give consumers a mark of confidence that the product they're purchasing has been sourced from regeneratively grown and raised products. It also provides validation to farmers, ranchers, nurseries, timber industry, etc., that what they're doing is good, not only for what they're producing, but for the land itself. It provides validation. So those are three things that I'm deeply involved with right now. May or may not take a little bit of my time.
Right, may not. That's awesome. We dropped links to Gabe's courses and websites in the chat there for you. And your ranch is how involved with the ranch are you now, your farm?
Yeah, and then that's a good point, and I think drives home the point of regeneration. So my wife and I have a son and a daughter, and our daughter is married and has children and separate, a life separate from the ranch. Our son, that's all he's ever known, is farming and ranching. That's all he's ever wanted to do. Well, when he went off to the university, we knew he was going to come home to the ranch. He didn't even want to go to the university, but I've kind of forced him to just get away from home for a few years. And I made a pact with him. I told him, you come back and farm with me when you're 30 years old, this farm ranch will be yours. I'll turn it over. And I kept that promise. And so he's been running the ranch now, him and his wife, for 7 years. And they're taking it way beyond where I ever did. So I still talk about it as if it's my own, but I really don't have much say in it. I get it to the ranch whenever I can, but you know, the last 5 years I've been on the road over 275 days a year. And so this has kind of become my life, even
Yeah.
though I'd much rather have some manure on my boots and be out moving livestock. When you go and get to meet the people I meet and be on farms and ranches, there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, it's such a gift. And his and your son's ranch is Brown's Ranch on Instagram if anybody wants to go and follow their journey there. I'm just going through more questions here, Gabe. Somebody has asked, what are the steps to converting an Iowa traditional corn soybean farm into regenerative? This in a nutshell, if you could give them maybe some hope.
Sure, and we work with a lot of producers in the I states, you know, and so often they think the only crops they can grow are corn and soybeans. First thing we're going to start to do is diversify the rotation. Going to put some cereal rye following corn. That way we can no-till the soybeans into the cereal rye. You'll be sequestering more carbon, and we oftentimes get a profitability bump from doing that. That's the first step. Then we're going to look for, okay, what are some other alternative cash crops that we can grow besides corn and soybeans? And many people are surprised to find out there's a lot of opportunities out there to grow other crops because of the favorable growing conditions in those I states. You're not limited to just corn and soybeans. And so we start diversifying the crop rotation. We start seeing more biological activity coming into the soil. We can start reducing input costs, increase profitability. That's where we start. And then from there, it all depends on where that particular person wants to take their farm or ranch. It's not that difficult to do, though.
Great insights, Gabe. Thank you. Gabe, if you were interviewing yourself, what question would you ask yourself?
And make them all easy because Gabe's really not very smart. So but, I guess what I would get into is I think people tend to believe this is much harder than it is. And I would get more into the psychic of it as to how you put up with the peer pressure, and that's one thing I'm very, very good at. People have been throwing darts at me for a long time, and bring it on. I don't care. You're not going to sway me whatsoever. Go ahead. But I would give them assurances and talk. I would ask the questions about that, about how do you put up with that peer pressure? How do you approach a lending institution? Because as you know, 90+% of farmers and ranchers still borrow operating capital every year, and I would ask questions like that.
Yeah. So how do you handle that pressure?
Yeah, the pressure is you have to be well versed and knowledgeable in what you're doing and on how nature functions. Because then I just kind of throw it back at them when people question me. I said, "Oh, so it wouldn't work on your ranch?" And no, it's not going to work on my ranch. I said, "Really? So nature doesn't function on your ranch?" You just spin it back on them, and you leave them kind of dumbfounded. Now, as far as the banker in the question, the lending institution, one is you have meticulous records. My son can tell you down to a fraction of a penny how much it costs him to produce a pound of hamburger, a pound of pork, an egg, a bushel of grain, whatever the case may be. When you have meticulous track records and you can show, hey, this is the total dollars we're able to generate per acre on our farm or ranch, he could walk into any lending institution and get a loan. Now, in saying that, my son's 37 years old and he's never borrowed money. Okay. He operates strictly on cash, a 6,000 acre ranch. And it's not because mom and dad handed everything to him. It's just that he's that good of a business person, plain and simple. Now, I'm not saying maybe for a short time he went and, made a large purchase of inventory or something. He might have borrowed a few dollars to bridge a gap, but there's no operating loans there or capital debt at all. So, not many people can say that at age 37. I know
Yeah.
I should.
Right. And I think a lot of that, it has to do with mindset. So can you talk just a little bit more about the mindset shift of
Yeah.
going through
And
that?
you shift, here I am now, as much as I don't want to admit it. My wife and I moved to town last June, and here I sit looking out at these neighbors. Everybody's got a boat and a camper and, 2 or 3 vehicles, and it's become a society where they just think they have to keep up with the Joneses instead of what do you really need and what's really important. And I think that shift in mindset, when my wife and I were so far in debt, having those struggles, those years of hail and drought, we really relied on our faith and really realized what's important is family and each other and our faith. And you really don't need near as much to live on as you might think you do. So you change your mind to what is really important. And I think we've lost that. To some people, importance is that their child is involved in every single activity out there possible. I would much rather it be what's important is our child is learning a work ethic. Our child's learning what soil is, where good food comes from, what life and death are about. I think that's much, much more important than having them enrolled in every single extracurricular activity out there. So to me, that's the shift in mindset.
And how can we bring these principles, soil principles, food principles into schools more?
Yeah, great question. And one that we're actually working on at Soil Health Academy is how do we expand learning opportunities in the school system. So one of the things we did is we went out, and thanks to a generous donation from General Mills, our online courses are available free of charge to any teacher who wants them, because we want them to be able to use these materials in their curriculum to teach children about regenerative ag. And then also we're working on some curriculum to help schools where they can have greenhouses and start producing food for their own school. Let the children be a part of producing that food, get their hands in the soil. I think it's a wonderful learning opportunity. And that all starts locally. Every one of us on this can help, drive that in our local school systems.
So exciting. There's a homeschool mom who said, can she access the lessons?
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome.
Yep. Just email Gabe at understandingag.com.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. There's a question in here. Do you know Sergey Zimov? Sergey Zimov? I don't know that name. I don't think.
Not that FC it. Yeah.
Yeah. Gabe, is there anything else that's on your heart that you want to share with us?
No, I just encourage everyone to make a difference. Just make a difference, whatever that may be. It's much more important than you might think, and never pass up the opportunity to have a conversation. I don't care if you're standing in line at a grocery store or with a coworker or, at a kid's sporting event. Just have a conversation about soil and health and nutrient dense food and the importance of it, because you'd be surprised where those conversations may lead.
Amen. And so be it. And so it is. Thank you, Gabe. Deeply appreciate you and your time today.
No, thank you. It was a real pleasure being with you. Thanks to every one of you for listening in.
Yeah. And just moving forward, how can we best support you and the common ground for the common good?
Yeah, you can best support me by having that conversation. Just do whatever you can in your own family, your own community. That's the best support you can give me.
Awesome. Well, we love you and we appreciate you and we thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Gabe. Enjoy your day. And you can go if you have not seen Common Ground yet, you can find it at the Common Ground Film, and you can rent it online, watch it with your friends, watch it at what are they, film festivals that are coming to your area. You can follow them and find out where they are going to be, so you can buy tickets to see it live if you want to see it live, and otherwise you can rent it online.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gabe.